King Vex's Nor of the mighty Zentari Empire paced his crystalline throne room, his 7-foot frame casting multiple shadows under the 3 moons visible through the transparent ceiling. His royal antenna twitched with each agitated step, a clear sign to all courtiers that someone was about to have a very bad day. "Where is my daughter?" he boomed, his voice echoing off the polished obsidian walls. "Where is the so-called princess who cannot even execute a proper battle roar?" The royal advisor, Grem, shuffled forward, his diminutive form barely reaching the king's waistline. "Your Magnificence, Princess Quasara is in the knowledge chambers." Again, reading. The king's purple complexion darkened to an alarming shade of aubergine. While the offspring of every other noble house master quantum weaponry by their 15th cycle, mine buries her snout in historical texts and philosophical treatises. As if summoned by the crescendo of her father's disapproval, Princess Quasara entered the throne room. Unlike the muscular build typical of Zentari females, she was slender, and moved with a quiet grace that was, by Zentari standards, deeply unsettling. "Father, I've discovered fascinating tactical insights from studying the ancient." "Silence," Vex's Nor roared, his chest plates expanding to their full intimidation posture. "I have made a decision that will finally serve the Empire's interests, since you clearly cannot." Quasara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of apprehension among her kind. "The humans seek an alliance," the king continued with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand, "and I have granted it, with you as the marriage token." The princess's antenna drooped. "You're giving me away? To a human? Consider it a promotion," Vex's Nor sneered. "From useless princess to useful pawn." Commander Jack Reynolds of the Earth Diplomatic Corps stared at the holographic message for the 5th time, hoping the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less absurd.
They didn't.
"Let me get this straight," he said to Admiral Wong, who had the misfortune of delivering the news. "I'm being married off to an alien princess as part of a peace treaty." The Admiral nodded, his expression a masterclass in keeping a straight face. "The Zentari Empire controls 3 major hyperspace lanes that we need access to. Their king offered this arrangement. The Security Council voted. You drew the short straw." "Fantastic," Jack muttered. "My service record includes 4 successful first contact missions, negotiating the Proxima Accords, and now alien husband gets added to my resume." "Look on the bright side," Wong offered. "Zentari live for about 2 centuries. You'll be long dead before the relationship hits any real rough patches. Your comfort is overwhelming, sir." 3 days later, Jack found himself in a sterile reception chamber aboard the Zentari diplomatic vessel, waiting to meet his future bride. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a Zentari female who looked nothing like the warrior race's typical representatives. Princess Quasara entered hesitantly, her 4 eyes darting around the room before settling on Jack. She was tall, all Zentari were, but lacked the imposing musculature Jack had seen in their military envoys. Her exoskeleton had an almost iridescent quality, shifting between purple and blue depending on how the light hit it. "Commander Reynolds," she said in perfect English, her voice softer than the usual Zentari growl, "I apologize for this inconvenience." Jack blinked in surprise. "You speak English. I speak 17 Earth languages, plus 32 non-terrestrial ones. Languages fascinate me." "That's impressive." "Not to my father," she said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "On Zentari Prime, scholarly pursuits are considered worthless without combat prowess." Jack studied her for a moment. "So your father thinks you're useless because you're smart instead of strong?" "Precisely." "Well," Jack said, a slow grin spreading across his face, "I think his loss might just be humanity's gain." The first week aboard the Earth diplomatic vessel Concordia was, by any reasonable standard, a disaster. Princess Quasara managed to accidentally trigger 3 different emergency protocols, short-circuit an entire deck's gravity system, and cause a small explosion in the galley when attempting to prepare what she called a simple Zentari breakfast ritual. "I don't understand," she said, her antenna drooping as she watched maintenance robots repair the scorched ceiling. "On Zentari Prime, cooking flames are supposed to reach at least 6 feet high." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. "On human ships we generally prefer our breakfast not to double as a weapon." The princess tilted her head, a gesture Jack was beginning to recognize as her version of embarrassment. "Another failure to add to my extensive collection." "Not a failure," Jack corrected, sliding a plate of pancakes toward her. "Just a cultural difference. Try these instead. Less lethal, more delicious." As days turned into weeks, Quasara's curiosity about human ways proved both endearing and occasionally terrifying. During her first training session in the ship's gymnasium, she accidentally dislocated the combat instructor's shoulder, having misunderstood the concept of sparring. "You said to demonstrate my strength," she explained, genuinely perplexed as the medical team rushed in. I meant show me what you can do, not send Lieutenant Hayes to the infirmary, Jack replied, trying not to laugh at the bewildered expression on her alien face. Zentari don't have practice combat. We fight, or we don't fight. There is no middle ground. Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully. That explains a lot about your diplomatic history. The real breakthrough came during an unexpected crisis. While traversing an asteroid field, the Concordia's navigation systems faltered, leaving them drifting dangerously close to a particularly massive rock. As the crew scrambled, Quadzara quietly approached the auxiliary control panel. "May I?" she asked, her four eyes focused intently on the holographic displays. Before Jack could answer, her slender fingers were flying across the interface, inputting complex calculations with astonishing speed. "What are you?" Jack began. "The gravitational interplay of 17 major bodies in this asteroid cluster creates a mathematical pattern," she explained without looking up. "Your system is trying to plot a course using standard Euclidean principles, but this requires non-linear differential equations." The ship suddenly stabilized, finding a smooth path through the dangerous field. Captain Reyes stared at the princess in disbelief. "How did you do that?" "I read your ship's technical manuals, all 26 volumes. Also, spatial mathematics was my recreational activity as a child. Other Zentari children played war games. I calculated orbital decay patterns for fun." Jack couldn't help but smile. "And your father thought this was useless?" "My father believes anything that cannot directly crush an opponent's exoskeleton is without value," she replied. Matter-of-factly, as the weeks stretched into months, Quadzara's integration into human society took unexpected turns. Jack introduced her to Earth's military history, expecting her to dismiss it compared to the Zentari's 10,000-year tradition of conquest. Instead, she became fascinated by human adaptability. "Your species achieved space travel despite your fragile bodies and limited strength," she observed one evening as they reviewed historical records. "You compensated with ingenuity and technology rather than physical evolution." "We had to," Jack shrugged. "Can't all be 7-foot-tall warrior aliens with natural armor." "But that's precisely what makes humans remarkable," Quadzara insisted, leaning forward with unusual animation. "Zentari's strategy hasn't changed in millennia because it hasn't needed to. We overwhelm with superior strength. But you humans develop new approaches constantly." Jack recognized the spark in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the most brilliant tactical minds at the academy. "You know," he said carefully, "there's more than one way to be a warrior." The princess's antenna perked up. "Explain." "Your father wanted you to be a traditional Zentari warrior, all brute force and battle roars. But the greatest human military leaders weren't always the strongest fighters. They were the smartest strategists." For the first time since he'd met her, Quadzara's mandibles clicked in what Jack now recognized as the Zentari equivalent of a smile. "Commander Reynolds," she said, her voice taking on a new determination, "I believe I require comprehensive training in human military strategy." Jack grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." The observation deck of Earth's Mars Military Academy became Quadzara's second home. While officially she was there as a cultural exchange diplomat, the reality, which Admiral Wong tactfully overlooked, was far more intriguing. The alien princess was undergoing the most unique military training program in Earth's history. Again Jack instructed, circling her as she moved through the complex sequence of movements. "Remember, you're not trying to overpower an imaginary opponent, you're redirecting their energy." Quadzara's exoskeleton glistened with exertion as she executed a flawless Aikido throw against her 7-foot-tall holographic opponent. Unlike traditional Zentari combat techniques that relied on overwhelming force, Earth martial arts emphasized leverage and precision, qualities that suited her more slender build perfectly. "I find it paradoxical," she panted, her four eyes blinking in rapid succession, "that human combat systems designed for physically weaker beings are actually more advanced than Zentari techniques." Jack tossed her a towel. "That's because necessity drives innovation. We couldn't rely on natural armor or superior strength, so we got creative. Like using an opponent's momentum against them," she nodded, catching on quickly as always. "Exactly. Now let's move on to strategic simulations." The holographic training room transformed into a tactical command center, displaying a complex battlefield scenario. Quadzara studied it intently, her antennae twitching as they always did when she was deep in thought. "This is the Battle of Thermopylae," she identified immediately. 300 Spartans against the Persian army. Jack raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You've been studying Earth history in your spare time again, haven't you?" "Knowledge is the foundation of strategy," she replied, already manipulating the holographic terrain. The Spartans used the narrow pass to neutralize the Persians' numerical advantage. a classic example of terrain exploitation. And how would a traditional Zentari force handle this situation? Quasara's mandibles clicked in what Jack now recognized as her version of a derisive snort. They would charge directly at the largest concentration of enemy forces, seeking glorious combat and an honorable death. Which explains why your empire has been shrinking for the past century, Jack noted. Indeed, our inability to adapt is our greatest weakness. She paused, manipulating the holographic display. But what if we combined approaches, Zentari physical capabilities with human strategic flexibility? Over the following months, Quasara immersed herself in every aspect of human military thought. She devoured Sun Tzu's Art of War in an afternoon, then spent weeks applying its principles to modern space combat scenarios. Where most Centauri warriors trained exclusively in weapons and hand-to-hand combat, she mastered logistics, intelligence analysis, psychological warfare, and asymmetric tactics. The transformation wasn't merely intellectual. Though she would never develop the bulky musculature typical of her species, her body changed through specialized training regimens designed by human kinesiologists to work with her alien physiology. She became faster, more agile, and developed remarkable precision in her movements. Qualities rarely seen in Zentari warriors who prized brute strength above all. Your father would never recognize you now, Jack commented one day after she had systematically dismantled an entire squad of elite human combat specialists in a training exercise, without once relying on her natural Zentari advantages. He wouldn't understand what he was seeing, she corrected, reviewing the performance data. To him, combat without roaring and chest beating isn't combat at all. The true test came 6 months into her training, during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission to the outer colonies. Their shuttle was ambushed by pirates, heavily armed mercenaries who had anticipated an easy capture of the soft diplomatic vessel. Jack was injured in the initial assault, a plasma blast grazing his shoulder. As the pirates breached the airlock, he reached for his sidearm, only to find Quasara's hand gently pushing it down. "Allow me," she said, a strange calmness in her voice that he had never heard before. What followed was unlike any combat Jack had ever witnessed. The princess moved with fluid grace, never making a sound, a stark contrast to the traditional Zentari battle screams. Where a typical Zentari warrior would have charged directly at the most dangerous opponent, Quasara first disabled the environmental controls, plunging the corridor into darkness that her 4 eyes could navigate perfectly. She used the confined space of the shuttle corridor to neutralize the pirates' numerical advantage. Rather than engaging in prolonged combat with any single opponent, she moved constantly, striking precisely at vulnerable points, before disappearing again into the darkness. Within minutes, 7 armed mercenaries lay unconscious or restrained, without a single fatal injury. "You didn't kill any of them," Jack noted as emergency lighting came back online. "Traditional Zentari combat doesn't have a non-lethal setting." "Killing them would have been easy," she replied, efficiently binding the last pirate. "Capturing them alive for intelligence gathering is strategically superior." Besides, she added with that clicking sound Jack had come to recognize as her version of a smile, "I'm not a traditional Zentari warrior." Later that night, as their shuttle resumed its journey with a security escort, Quasara found Jack in the medical bay, his shoulder wrapped in regenerative bandages. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble. "It's time to return to Zentari Prime." Jack sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. "You sure? Your training will never be complete, as any good warrior knows," she finished for him. "But I've learned enough to begin the next phase." "Which is?" Her 4 eyes fixed on him with newfound intensity. "Transforming the Zentari Empire, starting with my father's court." Jack studied her. The princess who had arrived on Earth, barely able to function without causing accidental destruction, now standing before him, as perhaps the most uniquely dangerous and brilliant tactical mind he had ever encountered. "They won't know what hit them," he said, with genuine admiration. Her mandibles clicked in that now familiar expression of amusement. "That, Commander Reynolds, is precisely the point." The royal court of Zentari Prime fell into stunned silence as the massive doors swung open. The traditional fanfare that should have accompanied a returning royal died in the musicians' throats as they beheld the figures standing in the entryway. Even King Vexnor, notorious for his unshakable composure in the face of enemy armadas, visibly stiffened on his crystalline throne. Princess Quasara had returned, but not as the meek scholarly disappointment who had left 18 Earth months earlier. She strode into the cavernous throne room with a confident gait that seemed to belong to an entirely different being. Her exoskeleton, once a soft iridescent purple, now bore the subtle gleam of biomechanical enhancements, not bulky or obvious, like typical Zentari battle augmentations, but elegant modifications that accentuated her natural form. Flanking her was Commander Jack Reynolds, looking remarkably comfortable for a human in the notoriously intimidating Zentari court. Unlike the defensive posture most aliens adopted here, he walked with the relaxed confidence of someone who not only belonged but might own the place. "Father," Quasara announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the vast chamber without the traditional Zentari bellow. "I have returned from Earth." King Vexnor's antenna twitched rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation that every courtier recognized with dread. "So I see," he responded, his voice deliberately controlled. "And you've brought your pet human with you." Jack's mouth quirked in a small smile, but he said nothing, seemingly content to let the drama unfold. "Commander Reynolds is my strategic advisor," Quasara corrected smoothly. "And my husband, as per your arrangement." The king's upper eyes narrowed while his lower pair scanned his daughter assessingly. "You appear changed." "Improved," she countered. "I have studied human military doctrine and incorporated it with our own strengths." A derisive snort came from the right of the throne, where General Kravzor, the king's most trusted military commander and a paragon of traditional Zentari warfare, stood with his arms crossed over his massive chest plates. "Human military doctrine." The general scoffed, his mandibles clicking rapidly in the Zentari equivalent of mocking laughter. "The species that required 3 attempts to successfully land on their own moon. What could these soft-skinned creatures possibly teach a Zentari about warfare?" Whispers and clicks of agreement rippled through the assembled court. Jack still said nothing, though an observant courtier might have noticed his eyes darting around the room, cataloging exits, weapons and the positioning of the royal guards. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order," Quasara suggested, her tone mild but with an undercurrent of something that made several nearby warriors shift uncomfortably. King Vexnor leaned forward, his interest piqued despite himself. "What sort of demonstration?" "Combat," she replied simply. "I challenge General Kravzor to non-lethal combat under the ancient rites of skill assessment." The throne room erupted in shocked exclamations. The ancient rites hadn't been invoked in 7 generations, a formal challenge that even a king couldn't deny without losing face. General Kravzor's exoskeleton flushed deep purple with indignation. "This is absurd. I will not fight the king's daughter. It would be over in seconds, and prove nothing except what we already know. You lack the physical prowess of a true Zentari warrior." "Afraid, General," Jack spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Where I come from, we have a saying about those who talk loudly but step back from challenges." The general's head swiveled toward the human, all 4 eyes blazing. "Your species would be extinct within a day if we decided to conquer your world, human." "Yet here I stand," Jack replied calmly. "On your world, in your court, married to your princess. Curious how that worked out." Before the general could respond, King Vexnor slammed his ceremonial staff against the floor, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap. "Enough, the challenge has been issued under ancient law, it will be met." He fixed his daughter with all 4 eyes. "Though I fail to see what you hope to accomplish besides further embarrassment." Quasara bowed formally. "Thank you, father. However, before we proceed, I believe there is information you should have." She gestured, and Jack stepped forward, activating a holographic projector. Above their heads materialized a detailed tactical map of the Zentari Empire, with pulsing red indicators scattered throughout. "What is this?" the king demanded. "Evidence of a coordinated rebellion brewing in 7 of your outer provinces," Quasara explained calmly. "Led by House Drevnar, who have been using your traditional military patrol's predictability against you." General Kravzor scoffed again. "Impossible. House Drevnar lacks the resources or courage for such treachery." "They lacked both until 6 months ago," Jack interjected, manipulating the hologram to zoom in on specific sectors. "When they began receiving weapons shipments from the Tarian Consortium through these 3 unmonitored hyperspace corridors." The king rose from his throne, his massive frame casting long shadows across the court floor. "These are serious accusations. Where did you obtain this intelligence?" "From multiple sources," Quasara replied. "Human intelligence networks, deep space monitoring buoys I designed based on Earth technology, and pattern analysis of communication frequencies your security forces consider too primitive to monitor." She stepped closer to the hologram, her slender fingers manipulating the display to show troop movements and supply lines. "The traditional Zentari approach would be to crush this rebellion with overwhelming force once it reveals itself," she continued. "But that would cost thousands of lives on both sides and potentially destabilize 3 major sectors. I propose an alternative strategy. The detailed battle plan she proceeded to outline left the court in stunned silence. It incorporated elements completely foreign to Zentari military doctrine, psychological operations, surgical strikes on leadership, rather than mass confrontation, and most disturbingly to the traditional warriors present, a complex feint that would make their forces appear vulnerable to draw out the rebels. This is not the Zentari way, General Kravzor finally sputtered. You suggest deception instead of honorable combat, trickery instead of strength. I suggest victory with minimal casualties, Quasara corrected. But if you prefer the traditional approach of discovering the rebellion only after it has claimed several border worlds and thousands of Zentari lives, by all means continue as you have been. King Vexnor's antennae had gone completely still, a sign of deep thought that few in the court had ever witnessed. These claims must be verified, he finally said. And this unorthodox tactical approach must be evaluated. Of course, Quasara agreed. Which brings us back to my challenge to General Kravzor. If I cannot defeat the Empire's greatest traditional warrior, why would anyone follow my untraditional strategy? The king nodded slowly. The challenge will take place tomorrow in the Grand Arena. His upper eyes fixed on his daughter, while his lower pair studied the holographic evidence of rebellion. Prepare yourself, daughter. General Kravzor has never been defeated. As the court dispersed in a buzz of whispers and speculation, Jack fell into step beside Quasara as they walked toward their assigned quarters. That went well, he murmured. Did it? She asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. My father and his generals still see only weakness in a different approach. They will learn, Jack assured her. Just like that pirate who thought you were an easy target because you didn't roar and beat your chest before attacking. For the first time since entering the throne room, Quasara's mandibles clicked in her version of a smile. Tomorrow will certainly be educational for someone. That night, as they prepared for the coming challenge, the princess received an unexpected visitor. Grem, her father's diminutive advisor, slipped into their chambers with uncharacteristic stealth. Princess, he whispered, his antenna quivering with anxiety, I must warn you. General Kravzor has enhanced his exoskeleton with illegal battle stimulants. He means to humiliate you completely, perhaps even circumvent the non-lethal restrictions. Jack started to protest, but Quasara placed a gentle hand on his arm. Thank you, Grem. Your loyalty is noted and will be remembered. After the advisor departed, Jack paced the room furiously. We should report this to your father. And what would that accomplish? She asked calmly, continuing her methodical preparations. Even if father believed us over his trusted general, canceling the challenge would only reinforce the perception of my weakness. So you're going to fight an illegally enhanced warrior twice your size, who might be planning to kill you? Jack demanded incredulously. Quasara's 4 eyes blinked at him in sequence, an expression he'd learned indicated amusement. Commander Reynolds, she said with that clicking sound that had become so familiar to him, have you learned nothing in our time together? The greater the opponent's strength, the harder they fall when it's turned against them. The grand arena of Zentari Prime pulsed with anticipation. 50,000 Zentari warriors and nobles packed the ancient tiered seating, their collective breathing creating an atmospheric disturbance that registered on the Empire's weather monitoring systems. The arena itself, a perfect circle of polished black stone surrounded by crystalline barriers, had hosted ritual combat for 10,000 years, its surface scarred with the chemical residue of countless battles. King Vexnor observed from the royal observation platform, his massive frame rigid with tension. Beside him sat Jack Reynolds, an unprecedented honor for a non-Zentari that had caused outrage among the traditional houses until the king silenced them with a single thunderous roar. Your mate appears calm for someone about to witness her humiliation, the king noted, his upper eyes on the arena while his lower pair studied Jack's reaction. Humiliation isn't on today's agenda, Jack replied evenly, his gaze fixed on the arena's eastern entrance where Quasara would soon appear. You misunderstand our ways, human. General Kravzor is the Empire's greatest warrior, undefeated in 376 ritual combats. Your affection for my daughter blinds you to reality. Jack turned to face the king directly, a breach of protocol that sent ripples of shock through nearby courtiers. With respect, your magnificence, it's not I who misunderstands. Your daughter isn't just fighting a general today, she's fighting 10,000 years of outdated thinking. Before the king could respond, trumpets sounded, announcing the combatants. The western gate opened first, revealing General Kravzor in full ceremonial battle armor. The massive Zentari warrior stood nearly 9 feet tall with his armor extensions, his exoskeleton gleaming in unnaturally bright purple, evidence of the illegal stimulants Grem had warned about. The crowd roared their approval as he performed the traditional pre-combat display, beating his armored chest plates and emitting the bone-vibrating battle cry that had terrified enemies across 3 galaxies. When the Eastern Gate opened, the contrast could not have been more stark. Princess Quasara wore no ceremonial armor, only a fitted combat suit of human design, modified for her Zentari physiology. She carried no weapons, made no displays, and walked into the arena with quiet purpose. The crowd's reaction shifted from anticipatory roars to confused murmurs. "What game is this?" King Vexnor demanded, rising slightly from his throne. "Where is her armor, her weapons, her battle display?" Jack allowed himself a small smile. "She doesn't need them." In the center of the arena, the combatants faced each other before the king. General Krovzor towered over the princess, his enhanced musculature rippling beneath his exoskeleton. "A pity your human pet won't recognize your remains when I'm finished," the general growled, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. Quasara's antenna remained perfectly still, a state of focused calm that unnerved the general more than any counter-threat could have. The ceremonial gong reverberated across the arena, signaling the beginning of combat. General Krovzor immediately launched into a full Zentari charge, the traditional opening move designed to overwhelm opponents with pure aggressive force. His massive frame barreled toward the princess with speed enhanced by illegal stimulants, battle spines extended for maximum impact. What happened next would be replayed in Zentari military academies for generations to come. Rather than attempting to match force with force, a contest she would certainly lose, Quasara simply wasn't there when the general's charge reached its target. She had shifted slightly, with precise timing that made it appear to the stunned audience as if the general had somehow passed through her. As his momentum carried him forward, she executed a complex maneuver that used his own mass against him, sending the massive warrior tumbling across the arena floor, in an undignified sprawl. The crowd fell into shocked silence. General Krovzor roared with rage as he regained his footing, his 4 eyes blazing with humiliation and drug-enhanced fury. This time he approached more cautiously, feinting with practiced precision before launching a blindingly fast series of strikes that had overwhelmed every previous opponent. Quasara moved like water, her form seemingly fluid as she redirected, avoided, and neutralized each attack. She never attempted to match his strength, instead using his own power and momentum as weapons against him. Where traditional Zentari combat was about domination through superior force, her approach revealed such tactics as predictable and exploitable. "What sorcery is this?" King Vexnor demanded, his antenna rigid with shock. "That," Jack replied, unable to keep pride from his voice, "is what happens when you combine Zentari physical capabilities with human adaptive strategy. She's not fighting like a Zentari or a human, she's created something entirely new." As the combat continued, a pattern emerged that even the most traditional warriors in the audience could recognize. The general, larger, stronger, and chemically enhanced, was tiring, while the princess appeared as fresh as when she entered. Every thunderous attack he launched consumed massive energy, while her economical movements preserved hers. It was a lesson in efficiency versus brute force playing out before 50,000 witnesses. 15 minutes into the combat, already the longest ritual battle in recent memory, General Krovzor's frustration overrode his tactical judgment. Breaking the sacred rules of ritual combat, he extracted a concealed sonic disruptor from his armor, a weapon specifically designed to shatter exoskeletons. The crowd gasped at this dishonorable act, but Quasara showed no surprise. She had anticipated this possibility, just as she had prepared for his illegal stimulants. As the general activated the weapon, she executed a move that Jack recognized from their training, a high-speed rolling dive that brought her inside the general's reach, past the weapon's effective angle. What followed was so precisely executed that many observers missed the actual moment of contact. Quasara struck 3 nerve clusters in rapid succession, points where even the thickest Zentari exoskeleton remained vulnerable. The general froze mid-motion, his massive frame suddenly rigid as his nervous system temporarily short-circuited. With elegant efficiency, she removed the illegal weapon from his paralyzed grip and presented it to the nearest judge, before returning to face her immobilized opponent. Rather than delivering a final blow while he was helpless, as traditional Zentari combat would demand, she simply waited for him to recover enough mobility to speak. "Yield," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying throughout the silent arena. "Never," the general managed to growl, though he could barely move his mandibles. "Then you will never learn," she replied, "and the empire will continue to weaken under outdated leadership." With that, She executed a final, precise strike that rendered the massive warrior unconscious without causing permanent damage, a display of control that impressed the combat specialists in the audience even more than her earlier moves. The grand arena remained in stunned silence until King Vexnor himself rose to his full height, the traditional signal for the combat's end. By ancient law, he was required to declare the victor, but for several long moments, he simply stared at his daughter, as if seeing her for the first time. The victory, he finally announced, his voice resonating throughout the arena, belongs to Princess Quo. The response from the crowd began as confused murmurs before swelling into something unprecedented, not the traditional roars that celebrated overwhelming victory, but a rhythmic clicking of mandibles that signified profound respect and acknowledgement of wisdom. As Quasara stood in the center of the arena, Jack couldn't help but smile at the transformation. The useless princess had become something her warrior culture had never seen before, a different kind of strength, a new model of leadership. 3 days later, in the royal strategic chamber, Quasara presented her full plan to neutralize the rebellion. King Vexnor, several key military leaders, and representatives from loyal noble houses, listened with rapt attention as she outlined a comprehensive approach that combined intelligence operations, targeted strikes and diplomatic initiatives. The rebels expect us to respond with massive military force, the traditional Zentari approach, she explained, manipulating the holographic display to show troop movements. Their entire strategy depends on it. They've positioned civilian settlements as shields, knowing our warriors would consider bypassing them dishonorable. And your solution? Asked one of the older generals, his tone respectful where once it would have been dismissive. A three-pronged approach, she replied, expanding the tactical display. First, targeted extraction of rebel leadership, using small specialized teams rather than massive battle groups. Second, a communication campaign to undermine support among their followers by revealing corruption among rebel commanders. Third, a strategic feint that will make them believe they've successfully drawn our main fleet away from their supply lines. Jack watched from nearby as the military leaders, all traditional Zentari warriors, engaged with concepts that would have been dismissed as dishonorable or weak just days before. The combined shock of Quasara's victory, and the evidence of imminent rebellion, had created an unprecedented openness to new ideas. This approach, King Vexnor began, his voice contemplative, it preserves Zentari lives on both sides. That is one benefit, yes, Quasara acknowledged. It also consumes fewer resources, concludes more quickly, and leaves infrastructure intact for continued imperial productivity. The king's antenna twitched in a pattern Jack had never seen before, something between confusion and dawning realization. You always spoke of such things, he said to his daughter, efficiency, preservation, strategy over strength. I dismissed them as the concerns of one too weak for real combat. I know, father, I was wrong. A hush fell over the chamber. For a Zentari king to admit error was virtually unprecedented in their recorded history. The empire faces new challenges, Vexnor continued, rising to his full impressive height. Challenges that cannot be overcome by strength alone. We require adaptation. 1 month later, the rebellion was over, not through the traditional Zentari approach of overwhelming force and considerable casualties on both sides, but through precise strategic operations that neutralized rebel leadership, while minimizing civilian impact. When the final report was delivered to the king, it showed casualties at less than 2% of what traditional methods would have inflicted. In the royal gardens, a rare quiet space in the otherwise martial Zentari culture, Jack found Quasara contemplating the triple sunset of her home world. So, he said, joining her by the crystalline reflecting pool, from useless princess to savior of the empire in under 2 Earth years. Not bad, her mandibles clicked in amusement. The true test begins now. Change comes slowly to a culture with 10,000 years of tradition. Speaking of change, Jack replied, your father has requested my presence at tomorrow's Imperial Council. Any idea what that's about? I believe, she said, with the subtle antenna movement that indicated satisfaction, he wishes to discuss the formation of a new type of alliance between our empires, one based on cultural and strategic exchange, rather than mere political convenience. Jack raised an eyebrow. And us, where do we fit into this grand new alliance? As its architects, of course. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, the gesture he now recognized as her equivalent of a smile, the human who saw value, where others saw weakness.
and the Zentari who learned that true strength comes in many forms. As the last of the three suns dipped below the horizon, Jack reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a political arrangement, a king discarding his useless daughter to a human diplomat, had transformed not just the princess, but potentially an entire empire. "You know," he said, taking her clawed hand in his, "on Earth we have a saying about underestimating people." "And what is that?" she asked, her antenna tilted in curiosity. "Big mistake. Huge." Her mandibles clicked in laughter as she gazed out at the emerging stars, the same stars that now represented not just the domain of traditional Zentari conquest, but the frontier of a new kind of strength, a different kind of leadership. A leadership that even the most powerful king in the galaxy couldn't command, only admire.